with further ado, or without further ado, John.
Now, first of all, let's just check volumes. Can you hear me in the back there okay?
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to read this screen? Because I'd invite you to come forward if it's going to be a problem.
No.
You guys are okay in the back? Okay, great. What I didn't tell you at the beginning was I'm a cybernetics newbie. I was unfamiliar with your society until Michael invited me, and I so appreciate the invitation. Thank you. I just consider it a real privilege to be here and have a chance to talk with you. I've got a presentation. It's probably a half hour to 45 minutes. You could interrupt, but I think if you just get the flow of my ideas, by the time I get to the end of it, you'll at least know where I'm coming from. The danger, of course, is that I just tell you what you already know. And I won't know whether that danger has actually unfolded until I get to the end. So please be patient with me, and we'll see how we go with things. Resilience, environment, and us. Just first of all, by environment, I'm speaking of that in the sort of fuller systems fashion. So if you're familiar with the seven community, seven capital model, or seven environment model, where you've got the natural environment, which is what we often mean by environment. You also have your social environment, your built environment, your human environment, the cultural environments, and so forth, is what I'm meaning by environment, so that broader environment. I guess I'd start by saying this. I believe that our environments are unstable, that we're facing a tsunami of change and uncertainty and turbulence. It's already begun, and for us to think it is only in one area would be wrong. It's lots of areas. If we only focus on one area, like climate change or the disturbances in our political system, we'll miss the opportunities that have the most leverage. And given that that's the case, as a consequence, often people believe that crises and disasters happen. Mostly they just believe it's not going to happen to them. And therefore they don't do a lot of preparation, and the outcome of that is in the crisis and coming out the other side, we do find our way through, but we're often just barely surviving. And really, I think we need a paradigm shift to how we approach the turbulence that we're facing, so that instead of just barely surviving each time, regardless of who the community is, we find ways of bouncing forward and thriving because of the energy that is stimulated in the crisis. If we're going to be facing more and more of them, if we don't do that, I think we're just going to get overwhelmed by them. It'll be a downhill slide rather than an uphill one. And so that's probably the thesis of what I'm going to be speaking about today, because I think it would just, from an ethics standpoint, would be just wrong for us to leave to our children and our grandchildren a world that's just barely surviving. I think we should leave a world that is thriving, but right now, I don't think we know how to do that. Or we do, we know pieces of how to make that happen, but I don't think we've created a system that's been adopted by our society to make that happen. Taking the theory and the practice and putting them together to create that kind of world is really, I guess, our vision, and something that our group, I'll tell you a little bit about us, Resilient Organizations, has been working on for the last 14 years, which is a long time in the resilience space, or at least in the organizational resilience space, to be more specific. So let me tell you a little bit about ourselves. That's sort of our logo. That's our logo there. That is what that is. A stylized version of a dandelion seed. The reason we use that is because the dandelion seed is a humble thing, but it takes the changing winds that blow it around to find new environments where it can thrive. And that's why we've chosen it. I don't think there are any perfect analogies, but for us it's a pretty good one, and it's the one we've chosen. Who are we? Resilient Organizations is a social enterprise. If you're not familiar with that term, it's basically a business with a purpose, a social purpose. We grew out of the University of Canterbury, so I'm from Christchurch, New Zealand, but not originally. As I said, I'm from Detroit, but our research group is based in Christchurch, and we were part of a nationally funded research program for almost a decade based at the University of Canterbury. Now we're a separate entity. We're not part of the University of Canterbury anymore, but they still host us. We are a group of, a transdisciplinary group, so at the moment it's a small group. There are 8 of us who work together, and we represent 6 different disciplines, probably 7 or 8 really. We've got a couple of civil engineers, got me with an accounting and information systems and computer security background. We've got someone from sociology, somebody from organizational psychology, somebody from geography. And every time we hire, we try to hire somebody from a different discipline. Obviously, we want to hire somebody who's bright and is a good fit, because our group, a key cultural characteristic for us is fun. So we want to have fun in what we're doing, not just work our asses off, but we do that also. But we think we can do both of those things together. It just requires a bit of thinking about how we do it. Oh, by the way, just so you're not left guessing all day, I'm 6'8". All right. Yeah, oh, and the other thing is, where's our friend from South Africa? I've come from the longest distance. At least that's what Michael tells me. He says there's a direct flight to Joburg, and there's no direct flight from here to New Zealand. The other thing I can tell you about our group is that we're a group of pracademics. If you've never heard that term, we're practical academics, I guess you'd say. We're interested in theory, so if you went to our website, we've got dozens and dozens of articles we've published in international refereed journals in a range of disciplines, but we always convert what we're doing into something that a small business person or the CEO of a multinational could actually use and put into practice. So we've got a series of booklets that we've produced, originally aimed at small businesses and not-for-profits, because they don't do a lot of this sort of thing, and they can't afford us, can't afford what we do, and that's part of our social purpose, is to give away the things that we learn. But we charge the New Zealand government and our clients normal consulting rates, which allows us to have this social purpose and still not be scratching around for resources. We focus on organizational resilience, but we use that term in its broadest sense. So an organization is any group of people working together to accomplish some purpose. It doesn't matter whether they're a rugby club or a central government, whether it's an economy as a whole or an individual organization or a sector within an economy. And we've worked in various parts of that over our 14 years because we think the principles are applicable right across. In fact, we think the principles that I'll describe to you are applicable even to individuals. Some things will look like they're missing to you, and they probably are, because of the perspective we've brought. But some of them aren't missing, they're just invisible, because to explain everything that we think and believe, we take more than just 1 or 2 diagrams. And so we simplify it, and some things remain invisible until you start talking to me or members of my team. Definitions. This is the definition that we created almost 14 years ago for organizational resilience. Bear that in mind, although I think it applies more broadly than that. It's a very simple definition. We did that on purpose because we wanted something that would make sense to anybody, not just to civil engineers or just to computer security specialists or just to geographers. So it's the ability to survive a disaster or a crisis and thrive in a volatile and uncertain world. We think both of those pieces are crucial, and often other definitions we've come across only deal with the first half. They deal with the survival part, and we think that's important. You need to survive, but we think it's insufficient for the kind of world we're going into, because surviving is probably going to mean erosion and going backwards over time. So we think the thriving piece is critical, and so you'll hear me say this over and over again from various perspectives. We live in an uncertain world. I think we have always lived in an uncertain world. I don't think that's totally new. But I think the rate of change and the direction from which change and volatility is coming at us is exploding on us. Things that used to be stable are a lot less stable now. For us, one of the key things for building resilience in a community, an organization, a society, is trust, and something that's been badly eroded. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we think you can approach building trust within organizations with some examples. I'm going to start off with some basics on organizational resilience. So some of these things will probably be familiar to you. Others will say, oh, it's an interesting way of approaching the subject. And so we've put together a model over the last 14 years. And I think this part is quite important. How do we operationalize resilience? Because when you talk to most people about it, feels like a pretty woolly idea. And we think if you're actually going to do anything with it that's going to make a difference to society, we need to figure out, how do we actually do this thing? Is there some way of measuring it? How can we tell whether we're going forward or backward? Or we just enjoy talking to each other, which is actually a good thing. I'm in favor of talking, for us to talk to each other. But if we're actually going to make a dent in the problem, we need to be able to do more than just talk to each other. And so I'll talk about our model, which consists of 3 attributes, 13 indicators, and 3 cultures. And I'll show you how the model fits together. And I'm not going to spend the next 45 minutes. I'm probably going to take 10 minutes because I want to talk to what I opened with. An opening piece of this, though, is that from a resilience standpoint, we think you can't just plan your way through it. Although we think planning is an important feature for organizations to plan for their future, make sure they have enough resources and various planning aspects. And larger organizations are moderately good at this, or some of them are. But the piece that in the past at least has often been ignored is the adaptive piece. And small organizations often are much better at the adaptive piece. But again, not always. But we think you need both of those because planning is good for the things you anticipate. But many of the things that happen to us we didn't anticipate. And so you need to have adaptive capacity to deal with the things you didn't plan for, or even the things you did plan for that turned out different because they actually were part of a cascading series of crises, and you didn't plan on the cascade. And what do you do now? And the ability to adapt is important, and we all have that ability to some extent without any planning and without doing anything extra. But there are some things that you can do to significantly improve your personal as well as organizational adaptability. This is the beginning of our model. It consists of 3 attributes: leadership and culture, networks, and being change ready. We've developed this over these 14 years, but in collaboration with the Australian central government. My co-leader, Erica Saville, sits on their Resilient Expert Advisory Group that advises the Australian government on how to maintain or develop the resilience of their critical infrastructure organizations specifically. Not just the infrastructure, but the organizations themselves and the people and how the impact that has on the communities. And sitting around these, we've got 13 indicators, and we've developed a couple of tools for measuring the resilience, self-report surveys, and a couple of other tools to help an organization gain some insight into where their strengths and weaknesses are and what the implications of that might be, so they can build a strategy for improving their resilience. So given those 3 attributes, these are the 13 indicators related to them. So leadership and culture, we think leadership is the most important of these because it has the capacity to either enable all of the rest of the indicators or disable them. And we've seen it over and over and over again. So leadership is quite important. But all as part of the leadership and culture, staff engagement, and even more than just engagement, how do you treat your staff? Will you get their best ideas because they like you, they trust you, they believe in what you're doing, or are they going to hide all those and keep them to themselves because they really think you're crap, but they appreciate the paycheck? Decision making, how you go about doing that. Is it done in an agile fashion or is it very hierarchical? Situation awareness, knowing what's happening around you, both externally, but even within your organization. Often there are a lot of things that the senior executives have no idea what's going on because they don't have a mechanism for talking to their people. And innovation and creativity. And then for networks, we're using that term in a fairly broad sense, so external networks is what we mean by effective partnerships. So that's your supply chain, your suppliers, your customers. It's also your competitors, knowing what's happening with them, being friendly with them, not just at their throats. What about the media? What about the government people that you've got to interact with? So all of those external relationships and how they work. Internal resources. You might think that's a funny place to put with networks, but the problem with many organizations is the silo nature of the organization means the resources can be bundled in the wrong places, and there's no porosity in the silos. So you can see breaking silos, or at least making them more porous, we think is really important for organizations to become more resilient. And then leveraging knowledge, The problem is knowledge, again, often sits within silos. If we can find a way of sharing knowledge, we'll come up with better solutions. I heard a number of you mention the need for multiple perspectives. That's really what we're talking about here in terms of leveraging knowledge. We'll get better solutions if we have a range of viewpoints on whatever the problem is we're trying to solve. But that's not typically how it happens in most organizations. Now we've got change ready. The planning side, you can see there, planning strategies and stress testing plans. Planning strategies would include maybe risk plans, business continuity plans, but also strategic plans and operational plans. Nothing new there. The problem is for most organizations, they don't integrate them, and because they're not integrated, they end up with these blind spots all over the place in terms of what's happening within their environment. Stress testing the plans. Often the plan gets made, goes on a shelf, sits there without much impact on the organization because they didn't test it to see, does this work under this circumstance, under that circumstance? Unity of purpose and proactive posture. Some of you might be thinking, well, why isn't that up here in your culture? Those are cultural things. That's true. But it's a two-dimensional model trying to describe a, 4 or 5 dimensional sort of idea. So just working within the limitations, the ability to explain what we're doing. Do we think all of these indicators, these 13 indicators, are equal? No, we don't. We think these 4, and maybe situation awareness, are more, they have more kick to them. You'll get more bang for your buck from them than you will from the others, but you can't afford to ignore the others because you could be blindsided by any of them. So they're all important, but these ones are, they're more important, you might say. Now I'd like to talk about the cultures of resilience. So I'll just decomplexify the model a little bit, remove the indicators, and just to avoid overloading your brain with too much. Again, leadership and culture, we think that's the most important part of the model. And the 3 cultures start with this one, which you notice overlaps these 2, and it probably overlaps on that too, but I just didn't draw it that way, is caring, because caring about your people, caring about your relationships with your supply chain, caring about the media who's just ripped the guts out of you over some crisis that they put on the front page, means you're going to end up with these fractured relationships, which means when you're in need of help, they're not going to give it to you. And so we think caring about your people is really important, and that goes internally, but it goes beyond that, which is why it overlaps here. It also provides the foundation for trust. If you don't care about one another, you're probably not going to trust one another. If you don't trust one another, there's a whole bunch of positive resilience behaviors that without trust, it will never emerge. And so we need to build caring into our thinking about how we do it. And typically this doesn't happen unless you're sort of a naturally caring person. Not everybody is, but it's such an important feature. The second culture is the culture of sharing. And that overlaps here, and probably overlaps up into here, so it overlaps the caring culture, but it's based on the caring culture. People aren't going to be prepared to share their good ideas if they don't trust you, if they don't think you care about them. Probably just keep their good ideas to themselves and maybe start a competing business because they had a good idea, but they didn't believe in you, didn't trust you, if you're the business owner or you're the chief of some government department or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't really matter much, I don't think. But sharing isn't just internal, it's also external. So if you want to build a resilient sector within an economy, you have to be prepared to collaborate with your competitors. This is a foreign idea to a lot of people in a lot of societies, and yet it's a critical piece when the stress comes onto a community or onto a sector for you to work together. Doesn't mean you have to give your trade secrets away to them, but working with them will come to your benefit in the long run and the benefit of your community. So sharing, that goes for your resources. Remember we were talking about silos and resourcing within an organization. The willingness to share resources will add resilience to your organization. But our budgeting processes don't support that. There's a whole bunch of things that we do within our organizations that don't support resource sharing, idea sharing, joint problem solving. So we've got a lot of cultural things within our organizations we need to fix. And the third culture is the culture of learning, which is again dependent on these 2. Okay, people need to know you care about them and they care about you as a consequence. You need to be prepared to collaborate, because if you're not prepared to collaborate, the learning's only going to happen in the silos, and those solutions are probably going to stay in the silos, and you're going to get You'll get some benefit from it, maybe 10, maybe 20% of the benefit, but you're going to miss most of the benefit because of the lack of collaboration, which leads on to more robust learning, because as a result of the collaboration, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 people from different disciplines or different departments or different areas collaborating on the solution. And you're going to get a better, more robust solution. Having the naysayers in the room when you're creating a solution is so important, because they're the ones who spot the unintended consequences that you are blind to. But if they're not in the room, you won't hear about that, and you'll come up with this fabulous solution that falls flat on its face because of some unintended consequence that was invisible to you. And that's one of the critical reasons why having multiple viewpoints is important. And we sometimes talk about 3G teams, and by that we mean 3 generations, although we also think multiple disciplines is important. So you got the gray heads who've been around for a while. They know what works and what doesn't work. You got somebody who's mid-career, who's an up and coming star, but they've got a different perspective on how things should work, more aggressive perhaps. And you've got the new hire, somebody who's fresh out of university, and they have the new ideas that are coming through the universities that may or may not have arrived at the institution yet, at the organization you work for. So again, that's a multiple perspective. The same thing would go with cultural perspective. So I'm sure I'm singing to the choir on that one. So that's just some simple background on what we mean by resilience, how we think it works within organizations. So I'd like to reprise back to where I started, which is that we think that a tsunami is coming, that a tsunami, that's, it might be a real tsunami, but then again, it might be Christchurch. That's a photo from Christchurch. If you're not aware of it, in 2010, 2011, Christchurch had a sequence, 18 months of earthquakes that devastated our city. Fortunately, the loss of life was lower than it might have been because of this way the sequence unfolded, but we still had 186 people lose their lives. It cost $40 billion. That was the loss level. That's 20% of New Zealand's annual GDP. Just to give you some comparator, the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster in Japan cost about 4% of their GDP. Hurricane Katrina was about 4% of the US GDP. So in terms of impact on the national economy, this was massive and completely out of proportion to what you normally expect from a very large event, partly because we're a small country. And we're the second most exposed country in the world to natural disasters. Only Indonesia is ahead of us. Because we have volcanoes, we have earthquakes, we have tsunamis, we have storms, we have landslides, because we're a very steep kind of landscape. I could go on with the list, but it isn't just natural hazards, though. We've got man-made hazards of various sorts. So we've got attacks coming from inside and outside the US or New Zealand or any other country you might think of, from various sources who, some of them just having fun, some of them want to make money, some of them want to undermine our way of life. And it's not always easy to tell which, but this is another source of instability and uncertainty for our societies. I don't need to tell you about terrorism. We all know about that, and it isn't going away anytime soon. We also have what appear on the surface in some cases to be good things. And so we've got things like self-drive cars and nanotechnology and genetic therapy and cloud computing, and the list goes on, of technologies that are just hitting their straps, just coming to the point where they're going to start impacting us in quite dramatic ways. And some of these things are actually quite good things, but I would not want to be in the auto industry, the insurance industry, or the power industry over the next 20 years, because they're all in for a devastating time from these technologies as they mature. And so we have these things which in some cases look like they're going to solve some of our problems. In some cases they may, but they're going to create a host of other unexpected, unintended results as well. Of course, we've got the potential damage that may come to us as a result of climate change. We have regional disasters of various sorts, including refugee and other unconstrained people movements. We have financial crises, the global financial crisis, which isn't that long ago, still fresh in most of our minds. And many of you be aware that it's not really over. The bow wave of that particular tsunami could easily be worse than the original. And we've got political changes. We may just jury you don't think that Donald Trump is the problem. Donald Trump is actually he's a symptom of the underlying deeper problems within New Zealand, but not just New Zealand, within Western society and the way we practice democracy. I think needs substantial reformation for it to actually be a viable system going forward. So these things are huge, but I'll be honest with you, the biggest disaster that we face is one that's been with us all of the existence of humanity, and that particular one is human hubris. The idea that we know more than we really do, and we try and enforce that idea on someone else. Because what it does, if we think we know more than we really know, it means we're not going to listen to the other guy, because if they tell us something that's different than what we think, well, they're wrong. And therefore we won't listen to them, which will mean, well, we won't demonstrate caring to them, and we certainly won't collaborate with them. And therefore there's not going to be a basis for us coming up with fresh solutions and fresh ideas that would have been good for our company or our city or our nation, or just our family. To me, it doesn't matter the scale, that the ideas are universal. And it comes in all shapes, all shapes and sizes.
You left out war.
I left out war. I left out a whole bunch of things. Yeah, that's an important one. I agree. I could have included a longer list, so I agree with you. I'm sure we could invite ideas that I missed that are major sources of turbulence for us. Another one that I didn't put up is the income differential between the rich and the poor in countries. So there's a whole range of things that contribute. Really, the idea is don't think it's just climate change, or don't just think that it's Donald Trump, or don't think that it's just any of these other things by themselves. Because if you do, you might even prepare for that one thing, and you'll be blindsided by something else. So we need to think systemically, and this is what we're here for. That's what we do. Even though to me cybernetics is new, thinking systemically isn't. And so we need to take the big picture, but we need to become practical about it. Just talking about it is not going to deliver a thriving future to our children and our grandchildren. We need to talk about it. That's a good starting point. We can't stop there. Which brings me to the second part, that most people do believe that disasters happen, but most of them don't believe that it's going to happen to them. So Christchurch, my city, knew that it was exposed to earthquakes, but we figured it was going to happen to Wellington, which is the nation's capital, which sits on top of two major faults. And they were way overdue, and we didn't know that we were even due. But we were pregnant, and we were due, and it did land. And so how do we deal with this issue of people having their heads in the sand, the ostrich syndrome, you might think? Why is it there? What causes it? There are some causes and effects. I'll touch on one or two, but there will be, again, dozens of different pieces that come together that cause us to know that something is true, but believe it's going to happen to somebody else, not to me. And therefore, I don't need to prepare. I don't need to collaborate with my community. I don't need to do this, but in such a way that it isn't just about the disaster. It's about today. It's about thriving today, preparing in peacetime for when wartime does land in our backyard. So what can we do about it? Well, I'll talk about a couple of things, a couple of strategies, but again, there would be dozens of others. Many of you, I presume, would be familiar with Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Those of you who haven't read it, it is a wonderful book, and you definitely should. It says a huge amount about our humanity. But his basic thesis is this, that the human brain works in two ways. It has a fast, automatic thinking side, which is based around our habitual ways of doing things, the way we've been raised, our worldview, our emotions, and other things like this. And it functions 96% of the time. So most of the time, that's where we're functioning. And it has one significant drawback. It's really good. It's very fast. So if you need to make a quick decision or take some quick action, bang, works great. And that works really well most of the time. You avoid getting hit by a bus as a consequence of fast thinking and a whole bunch of other things. The drawback to it is it's got virtually no capacity for doubting itself. And if you're functioning in a space 96% of the time, and you've got no basis, that side of your brain doesn't have any basis for doubting itself, How do you think you're going to deal when you sit down with somebody over dinner and start talking about something you disagree on? If you've got no capacity to doubt yourself, you're probably going to have a big blow-up argument with them because they don't have any capacity to doubt what they're saying either. And so if we're cognizant of that, we're more likely to stop for a moment and start questioning our assumptions. Not their assumptions, our assumptions. And then ask about their assumptions too, because that allows us to start shifting sideways into the slow thinking side, which does function, but you've got to shift purposefully. Often most people have to shift purposefully into that space in order to make sense of it. So how do we overcome this ostrich syndrome, this fast thinking thing? Well, there are a couple of strategies I'd like to describe. One of them is going back to how do we communicate about whatever it is we want to communicate about. In my case, I want to communicate about resilience. How do I go about communicating resilience to people? And the answer is that I need to care about the people and share with the people and learn with them, not enforce my thinking and learning on them. And that's a different paradigm, but it's not maybe so different to you, because most of you are probably familiar with design thinking. I've had one of my colleagues just spend a week at the Stanford Design School, and design thinking is really, that's kind of the same thing. You go in and you spend some time empathizing with the people, getting to know their culture, thinking about what their real problem is, not what your perceived approach to their problem is, and then you work together with them to create a solution, a learning solution, and you continue working with them until the solution is on their desktop or in their building. The design people, again, this is probably no news to you, but we think it's quite a critical piece of building resilience in organizations, because it allows you to stop, turn the automatic thinking off for a moment, and move into this uncomfortable space where you actually have to learn something new and talk to somebody else and find out their perspective, not yours. This is not easy. Listen to yourself the next time you're talking to someone and you're listening to them. If you can pause long enough to listen to your own thinking, most of the time you're not really listening to them, you're thinking about what you're going to say next, what you think about what they're saying and how you disagree with them. You got all this stuff going on inside your head. But we may well be able to pause that and say, hold it, let's actually listen to what they're saying and ask them some questions. Some of the comments we had earlier that Michael was talking about in terms of processing. Asking questions is a way of putting on pause our fast thinking and shifting over into the slow thinking side of things. And we see all kinds of examples. Let me give you one brief example from the disaster literature, which is, and some of you will have heard this, how many of you know that everyone, in order to prepare for disaster, should have at least 3 days worth of food in your house? How many of you have heard that before? Yeah, and I think it's a great idea. The problem is the rich already do that because they go shopping every week or every couple of weeks. They just buy what they need for the next few weeks. The poor, they go shopping every day. So they have 1 day's worth of food. But actually, it probably costs them 10 to 20% more to buy their food that way. So if instead of trying to scare them into stocking up, we could actually work with them and help them save 10 or 20% of their food budget. How many of you think they'd be much more likely to take action on that than getting scared into something you don't believe is going to happen to them anyhow, right? So get a budget advisory service working with them, and this does happen. I don't think it's really a new idea, but joining the two ideas, that is new. I've talked to lots of people, and no one's ever said, oh, I had that idea. I've heard of somebody doing that. But joining up ideas from different perspectives to solve multiple problems with a solution that people actually care about, which is saving 10 to 20% of their food budget. If they only went shopping weekly, they'd have 3.5 days average food, not 1 day or half day's food in their cupboard. And that's part of design thinking, really, is sitting down and thinking systemically and finding out what really bothers them, and then taking that and saying, what I'm trying to accomplish is this thing. How do we join these up to create a solution that they actually will care about and carry on with? So I come to my next piece, which is how do we turn barely surviving as a consequence of not believing it's going to happen to us? How do we turn barely surviving into opportunity and thriving? And this is a paradigm shift in the same circumstances. It's a shift in our thinking. It requires a shift in our behavior and our dealings with one another. How do we move from barely surviving to opportunity and thriving in the face of the tsunami of change and disturbance and turbulence that's coming our way? I like this image because that is his solution, or her solution, is to take all the energy that's being generated by this disastrous wave that's coming their way and having a ball with it. It's an entirely different view than if you're the person swimming in the foreground, drowning, and here comes another big wave and I'm really in trouble, which is how most of our society sees all the turbulence that's coming our way, most of the time. Even us often will feel that way. But if we can learn to do this, whatever that looks like, operationalized in your life, then we can turn the corner. So not totally irregardless. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm sure there are existential disasters that could wipe mankind out. And we're not going to fix that with this thinking, but it will deal with that large list of things that I already showed you in very significant ways. If we start thinking differently and behaving differently and working with one another in a fashion that looks for what I would call thriving solutions rather than just solutions. Because the solution fixes the problem, but doesn't think how I can make things much better. Just, you rebuild the bridge and it allows the cars to get over. But why not rebuild the bridge and have it be beautiful? Why not rebuild the bridge so people can walk over it, ride their bikes over it, and the train can run over it? Or other ideas that would make it a fun, more interesting, adding value to a society beyond just being able to get your cars and trucks over the bridge. So thriving solutions that allow us to bounce forward is really what we're wanting. And I'd like to give you 3 examples from Christchurch. So we've been through this disaster. Okay, we've got about 350,000 people, so it's one of the world's, it's a small city, but before the earthquakes, it was one of the world's great small cities. It's won a whole string of awards. If any of you ever come to Christchurch? Oh, quite a few of you. Did you come to Christchurch before the earthquakes? Yeah, so it is, isn't it? It's a beautiful city, lovely, engaging city. And that might be the iconic picture of Christchurch. It's got a combination of the modern and the traditional, and where heritage is an important part of the culture. The problem is that this is what happened in 2010 and 2011, and a lot of that heritage was wiped out in terms of construction, in terms of beautiful old buildings, and a lot of people lost their lives. And it had a devastating impact on our economy. Not on the economy, actually, that's a different story that I don't have time to tell you today, but in terms of the cost. Fortunately, we're a very well-insured country. We're the most well-insured country in the world to earthquakes, second only to Holland in terms of the disasters they face, with 80% of the losses were covered by insurance. Again, I'll give you a comparison. The Chileans had a big earthquake not long after this, and I think 27% of their losses were covered by insurance. In Japan, Tohoku, I think, was 15%. New Orleans, something similar, 15%. So New Zealand's on a different planet, really, when it comes to insurance. And you'd think that's a wonderful thing, but even wonderful things have unintended consequences. It's probably slowed our recovery down by 5 years because of the difficulty of navigating through the issues around the insurance. Again, different story, but it's a similar story that we need to think beyond just the short term. We need to be prepared to go for the long term, come up with real solutions to foundational problems, and not just deal with the surface issues, not just deal with the symptoms. But this is the Christchurch that we're getting now. It's a different Christchurch, but it is going to be a dramatically better Christchurch in most ways. Yes, we will have lost some of our heritage buildings, but they're doing a fabulous job of bringing most of the heritage buildings that survived back on stream, but it's going to take time to get there fully. Don't ask me about the cathedral. I don't want to get into it. It's been a difficult one. But let me give you some examples of why Christchurch is going to be dramatically better. I told you, Christchurch, one of the world's great small cities. I believe it's going to be 2 or 3 times as good. It was one of the world's great small cities already before, when we get finished. The housing, the residential rebuild, pretty much finished. much more robust to earthquakes, much more energy efficient and livable, better community design. A lot of good things happened during the residential rebuild. The horizontal infrastructure, so your pipes and pumps and power lines and telecommunication, eroding all of that, is going to be significantly better, even though there were constraints on how much they could spend. Definitely new technologies used, more robust to earthquakes, more functional to other kinds of disasters like sea level rise and things like that also. The part that was damaged the most was our commercial center, the central business district. We had approximately 80% of our commercial buildings have been demolished because of the earthquake damage. Some of them were demolished as a direct result of the earthquakes themselves. Some of them, they were just too badly damaged to be repaired. They had to be demolished. Consequence of that is we're going to have these beautiful, highly energy efficient, much more earthquake robust, and taking into account other kinds of disasters like sea level rise, a clear story below. So if there was flooding even up to 3 meters, you could end up with Venice. We're not expecting that level of sea level rise in New Zealand that quickly, but one never knows. So more earthquake resistant. But some of the other things are beautiful indigenous art. It's finding its way into the rebuild that never existed before because there was a poor relationship between the city of Christchurch and the local Ngāi which is the Maori tribe that is predominant in the South Island. Well, that relationship, as a result of the earthquakes, has become wonderful rather than terrible. And we're finding all kinds of design work from their indigenous art finding its way into the city. I think it's a fantastic outcome. So we've got all of these positive things coming as a result, including the design of the city. So much more cycle-friendly, much more pedestrian-friendly, more energy-friendly. Much more, it's being developed as a smart city, so we're getting a lot of measurement techniques built into the infrastructure as it gets built. So many good things. To me, that's a bounce-forward solution because we got something better than we had before, even though in between there was this terrible thing happened. Let me give you another example. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Student Volunteer Army. Any of you ever hear that term? No, one or two of you have. When the big earthquake in February 2011 happened, one of our students at the University of Canterbury decided to set up a Facebook page to see, is there anybody out there who wants to give me a hand? We're going to go down and help some of the neighborhoods dig out from liquefaction. If you're not sure what liquefaction is, it's all this muck that comes up in the earthquake and causes your houses and roading and everything else to sink down. And it's really horrible. Well, that's what all of these university students are doing, helping community members dig out their houses. Well, when you stop, you might think, well, that's nice. Yeah, it is nice. But think about the leadership that they've had to develop. Think about the character and virtue they've had to express as a consequence of this happening. They've had to work with old people who typically just thought the students were rat bags, breaking their letterboxes and causing trouble and waking them up in the middle of the night. So we've got social capital being developed between across the generations that would not have happened without the earthquake. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting you should go out and get an earthquake or tsunami or something to create that. But when it happens, let's not just barely survive. Okay? Let's find ways of springing forward so that when we're done, we're significantly better off than we were before the thing happened. That way, we will leave to our children and our grandchildren a thriving future, not one where everyone's just barely hanging in there and hoping that something else bad won't happen. And I can guarantee you it is. Okay? We just need to turn what we mean by bad on its head. And these aren't new ideas. I mean, if you've read anything of the Stoics, I could be preaching Stoic philosophy to you in some ways of the things I'm saying. So in some cases, we don't need new ideas, really. We need to go back and reclaim some old ideas. Another one that I can mention to you is the global health system crisis. And New Zealand's experiencing it too, because we have an epidemic of obesity, we have an epidemic of old age, people growing older because the health system has provided solutions. We're living longer. We've got these fabulous new technology health solutions that are also very expensive, but everybody thinks they deserve it, and maybe they do. How do we afford it? We've got economies that struggle to keep up with trying to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots, between what we would like and what we think we can afford. How do we deal with that? And I'd like to tell you the story about the Canterbury District Health Board, who started thinking about this 2 or 3 years before the earthquake, so they had already started taking action. And what they did was they decided that they could see this tsunami coming at them also. They weren't getting more money from the central government. New Zealand, if you're not aware, has a public health system. It's a very good public health system. It delivers high quality health care, at least as good as you'd get in the United States, to the entire population for about a quarter of the cost in the United States. Different subject, but an interesting one. In spite of that, they're facing this also, being overwhelmed by potential costs. So they decided they were going to do something about it and not wait for the central government to figure it out. So they used design thinking. They got together with their primary health care, which are your general practitioners and pharmacies and those who are meeting people every day, with the tertiary sector, which is the hospitals and all the pieces in between, said, we need to do this differently. What can we do? And they discovered a couple of things, a whole bunch of things. So I won't I could spend 2 hours just talking about this. But a couple of things they discovered was people would rather recover in their own homes because it's a safer place, because hospitals actually aren't that safe. We need them to do certain things, but you're just as likely to get sick in the hospital when you went in healthy as the other way around. And so that's a problem. Turns out it's also a solution. Because if people recover at home, instead of spending 2 weeks in the hospital, they spend 2 days in the hospital and go home. They're going to be healthier, they're going to recover faster, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper because it's costing $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 a day for care in the hospital. It's costing, $1,000 a day maybe at home with home care coming in and a visit from the GP and various kinds of help that you can get. Well, we take the problem, we turn it on its head, we've got a solution. Well, they had a whole series of these kinds of solutions. And the outcomes have been already a 30% reduction in bed days in the hospital. 30%. This is when the demand is actually going up everywhere, including around the country. They've had a 30% reduction. And the population as a whole is healthier. It's not hugely healthy, that hasn't gone up steeply, but it hasn't deteriorated, which you would argue, well, they didn't have enough time in the hospital, they got pushed out of the hospital, they had to go home too soon, and therefore things are going worse. Things aren't going worse, they're improving, but slowly. So that's dramatic, really. The rest of the hospital system in New Zealand probably had a deterioration in terms of their cost benefit, that 30% thing, probably 5 or 10%. They've got a 30% improvement. That's dramatic. And they're now continuing to work on this internally, and we're working with them on some of the pieces that they're doing. So let me finish on this. For us to become a more resilient society, we cannot settle for simple solutions to complex problems, because all that's going to do is allow us to just barely survive. All right? We need real solutions that deal with causes, not just effects, as part of this bounce forward. We have to deal with people where they're at, though. Accepting that we have fixed ways of thinking most of the time. We have to find out where they think the problem is, even though maybe a different problem that we're trying to solve, and then take where they think the problem that they have every day is. Not having enough food on the table, can't afford a house, their mother is dying of cancer, whatever it is, finding the thing that bugs them the most, that worries them, and joining it up somehow with the bigger, more foundational things that we were trying to solve, and find common solutions for those, because they will persist. The other solutions won't persist. They'll persist while the economy is good, or while it's political, and then they'll rip the guts out of it in 5 years because it's not in the budget anymore. People don't do that when it's feeding the family every day. So you have to get everyday benefits in order to gain long-term solutions, because otherwise people will stop doing it. We've seen this over and over and over again. So we need to face our turbulent, uncertain environment, but not with fear and trepidation. I think we need to face it with virtue and with courage, because virtue is the heart of this caring and sharing piece. Virtue isn't taught in our schools anymore. Or at least I haven't heard of it being taught in our schools, and most of us have probably struggled to list off the seven fundamental virtues, things like courage, having trust in people, hope. But those things are fundamental. What about justice? So those 7 fundamental virtues are things that we need because they'll allow us to care for one another. They'll allow us to collaborate and work together, and they'll allow us to create fresh solutions going forward because of the foundation for it. And if we'll do that, we'll be those kinds of people, because everyone in this room is a leader in some fashion. Maybe a leader in your family. You may be a department head, or you may be in some other senior role. But if we become the kinds of people I'm talking about, then we'll provide that kind of bounce forward opportunity. We'll start creating changing the culture that we work in, and then the world can throw whatever it likes at us, and we'll have a thriving future for ourselves and for our families. Thank you. Now that was a soliloquy, but we're supposed to be having a discussion. So I'm going to stop talking, at least until you ask me some questions, and we'll have a discussion. I'll answer questions until you run out of questions, or you just want to do your breakouts, and then we'll do our breakouts. Yes?
Did your program get started before or after the earthquake?
We started in 2004, so we've been going for 14 years. The first earthquake happened in 2010. But we did find that some of our theories didn't actually work, or didn't work quite the way we thought. But they did work sort of under certain circumstances, depending on how you looked at it. So, yeah, we learned a lot. It's been an experimental lab.
Did the earthquake change your program appreciably as far as interest from the public? Or?
Dramatically. Yeah, before the earthquakes, we were all embedded within the university, within our various departments. And we were academics, and many of you are academics in this room, so we were going through our normal academic thing. And after the earthquakes, the demand for what we were doing and talking about went through the roof. And that was the cause for us to leave the university, because the university was not giving us any new resources. Not their fault, they were under stress themselves, in terms of students leaving and buildings damaged and all the rest of that. But the reality was, we get all this extra demand on us, and we've got no new resource we can't actually supply, can't meet the demand. And part of that's just, a university has difficult, slow processes, they're not agile. They've got processes that take a long time. I'll give you an example. We hired our first employee while we were still within the university. It took us 6 months to get them in place. We hired our second employee after we left the university, but still affiliated. It took us 2 weeks to get the employee in place. And that's pretty typical of the difference in leverage. When you can just you have an idea and you make a decision and you action it. But if you have to go through your dean and head of department up to the vice chancellor and president and down through, a budget committee, and things take 6 months. So we knew that for us to actually persist, we were going to have to move out of the university. Otherwise, we were both going to throw our hands up in despair within 2 years and quit, which we didn't want to do. Yes?
So what is the underlying culture and systems in New Zealand that allow these kinds of virtues, as it were, to come into play? What we saw here, for example, with Hurricane Katrina, was exactly the opposite of what you described. Namely, the situation was used to take advantage of the situation, for example, to get rid of the public schools, to basically get rid of to many of the poor of New Orleans as possible.
Sure.
And things of this sort, which we would probably in this room describe as politically retrograde and culturally retrogressive.
Let me describe a little bit about New Zealand, although to provide a counter example, I think there was a lot of community. If you didn't look at Hurricane Katrina, but instead looked at Superstorm Sandy, there was a lot of community involvement. People did pull together quite a lot. Same thing at the time of the attack on the World Trade Center. So I think it isn't like New Zealand is perfect and the U.S. is shit. I don't think that's true. I think both places have a bunch of human beings in them, and we're a complex lot. And as a consequence of us being a complex lot, you get complex results depending on what's happening in particular areas. And I think in New Orleans they were poorly led. The mayor wasn't really up to the game, and neither was the governor of the state. There was too much expectation of the federal government coming in on the white horse and solving their problem, when in fact the community in New Orleans that most quickly recovered was the Vietnamese community. And they weren't waiting for anybody to do anything for them. They just grabbed their bootstraps and pulled themselves up and started looking after each other. And I'm not saying we don't need a central government to help. I think we need both. But if we're just dependent, that's not a resilient behavior. Okay, resilient behavior is self-reliance and interdependence. It's the combination of those two things, where we're prepared to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem, but we recognize that we need help. We need both of those things, not just one or the other. We can't look to Big Brother to solve our problems, because Big Brother's way too slow. Yes, here.
So earlier in your presentation, there was a description that you had something like 13 indicators and so on. And I was just wondering to what extent the indicators that you've identified are invariant with respect to context as opposed to just completely context dependent.
Really important question. So those 13 indicators, number one, they're intended to be leading indicators, not lagging indicators. So if organizations demonstrate strength in those areas, we would expect that they would be much more likely to bounce forward in a bad situation rather than either collapse completely or just barely survive. But that isn't quite what the question is. The question is, that those 13 indicators, do they invariably apply to every organization under every circumstance? The answer is absolutely not. I'll give you a specific example. If you look at those 13 indicators, only 2 of them are specific to planning. Remember that little diagram, planning and adaptive capacity? Only 2 of them are specific to the planning side. The rest of them are probably more related to the adaptive capacity side. And yet for critical infrastructure organizations, those 2 planning aspects are much more important, okay? Because they're having disasters all the time. If they have a pump break, stop delivering drinking water to any part of the community, it becomes a disaster for that piece of the community. Or the power lines go down because of a snowstorm, and you've got a community that's isolated, doesn't have power. And so the planning side, they have, it's really much more important for them. Whereas for small business, that side's not as important. The leadership is important in all cases, but for a small business that's facing an economic crisis and their customer base is evaporating on them because of the state of the economy, for them, it's their networks that's critical for them, and the relationships with their employees is critical for them. So they all have some importance all the time, but you'd have to have a slight, if we built a model, a computer model that would allow us to model this whole process, you'd have to have sliders from 0 to 100% on all 13 of those indicators. And a whole bunch of other things that sit under the surface. So for example, we didn't have communication on the surface of our model, but communication is critically important, obviously, if you're going to be an effective leader, effective decision maker, working well with your employees, good networks. All of that requires good, effective communication. So there's a bunch of things that are invisible in our model on the surface, but we're cognizant of. Now, Candy, you had your... Yes.
Actually, I just want to make a comment, and you spoke about trust and adaptation, and that resonated a lot with me. In South Africa, we're dealing with this distrust in the education system, on the former colonial legacies that have happened, and those universities which have been able to be resilient have to form a trust relationship with the students. In fact, even in my classes, when I walk in, I actually ask my students if they're prepared to trust me as their leader. Because without that trust, there's no cooperation.
Absolutely. Can I give you an example of that? I was visiting the University of Sydney probably 12 or 14 years ago. It was actually before this program started. And I was talking to the dean of their medical school. And when he came in, they needed to transform their medical school because it was in the old mode where you went in and you taught about pediatrics and then you taught about these various siloed pieces. But he recognized the future of good medicine was more systemic medicine in joining up the pieces more. But the faculty were dead set against the idea. And he knew it was the idea he needed to implement. So he's got a problem. You know what he did for the first 18 months? He didn't do any of it. Well, that's not quite true. He spent the 18 months going around talking to the faculty, asking them, what's bugging you? You know, I've got this idea. Why do you think it's a bad idea? Tell me why you think the way you do it is really good. Let's have a conversation. And he wasn't trying to shove anything down their throats. He didn't have a plan already constructed. He was using design thinking. He was empathizing with them and trying to find out where they were coming from and why the obstacles, and was there a way to overcome those obstacles that would satisfy both sides, and we create a better health outcome for the community. It took the first 18 months, whereas most new CEOs or deans or whatever would bowl in, and then they're going to make their mark because they've been brought in by the board of directors to fix this thing. It's totally wrong, because you get short-term solutions like we're getting all the time for long-term problems, simple solutions for complex problems, and it just turns to crap as soon as they leave. Candy.
All right, now, it's funny, in your talk, you more and more, you talk about design thinking. So that word came on more and more. I'm not sure whether it's because of the nature of the audience, but here comes a comment from the design side. To designers, tsunamis and the challenges are not as bleak as they seem from your presentation. And you build up these narratives that are about something nice existing and something really bad coming our way and trying to destroy us. But in fact, this is really based on a linear narrative of something existing, then something cutting this kind of progression, and then something having to recover. From a design perspective, we think much more in circles, also in cybernetics. We think in circles, and we see that this tsunami is not one tsunami, but we constantly face these challenges. And I wonder why your model never really addresses this recovery, this circular nature of thinking about something, learning about it. You have all these terms there, but maybe that's something about the way we represent it.
Sure, yeah, I can appreciate it, and I agree with your comments completely. We would agree sort of philosophically, 100% with what you're saying. Yeah, I guess in some ways, this idea of we've got all these disasters coming our way, partly is from our background, because a lot of our beginning work was out of disasters. But when you think of bouncing forward, it is a cyclical idea where we're staying ahead of the curve. And I think the reality is, not for you, not for those who are in this room, but for most of our population, straight line thinking is how they think. They don't think cyclically, they don't think systemically, but it's one of the things we need. So that's another solution to part of our problem, is starting to train our children, as we have done in terms of the green impact and our concerns about our natural environment and so forth. A lot of that has gained traction as a result of changes in the curriculum in schools. If we could be training them in systemic thinking, in circular, not just linear, they would be far better off in understanding that they have this automatic thinking on one side and they need to shift over to the other side so they can hear others. So yeah, I agree with you. Probably just the nature of my presentation, rather than there being a huge discontinuity between how we see it. Yes.
I'm trapped into thinking about planning. It seems to be a word that's got rather boxed in from what it could be. When I was in my era as an environmental consultant, we did strategic plans every year, and I got very frustrated because we never did them, because things changed along the way. But then I got thinking that these are really scenario building exercises that enable you to consider what resources you might have to have on hand. And what have you thought about planning more in that format, and did it within the caring sharing cycles of your Venn diagram, so that you are finding out what others know and caring about what might happen to them. So it's not only often in the learning cycle, because of course the learning will happen in that case.
I agree 100%. I've got another talk where I talk about planning to adapt. It's just exactly what you're talking about, which is that planning doesn't have to be just creating this big plan that goes on a shelf. It's the interaction, it's the scenario planning, it's thinking about the different consequences and outcomes that might happen.
Can we have a new word so people don't get trapped in it?
Yeah, it's difficult because we invent new words. I don't know if any of you know Nassim Taleb's work on, he's written a couple of books, Black Swan and Anti-Fragile. He's came up with a new word for resilience, anti-fragile, but his anti-fragile definition is pretty much the same as my resilience definition. So, and it's not a word that's caught in society. So, I don't know, there isn't an easy solution to, sometimes you need a new word, but it won't gain traction, so you've got to repurpose an old word in ways.
Actually, to build on this, but starting differently, you started saying that resilience is the ability to survive, and that triggered immediately saying, no! And then came all your examples, none of them had to do with survival. but with thriving.
That's right.
And so that, I think this is the wrong way to start even to think of surviving, because surviving means basically staying constant. Now, and then from a cybernetic point of view, and this is what Phyllis says, well, I see here that planning is not just planning, it is imagining possibilities. And I think from a cybernetic point of view, the issue of thriving means always generating possibilities, whether they are through communication, through planning, through new ideas, to art if you want, and challenging within the communities. And that is, I think, from a cybernetic point of view, the motor of the ability to thrive. And I'm thinking also lots of other situations that I know of where disasters have hit, and actually of almost none of them, unless the community totally disappears, none of them have gone back to the state where they were. All of them improved. Whether it's rebuilding the sewage system or it's always new. So that is inherently, I think, I'm still struggling with the word resilience, but I think that is the cybernetic notion that you can't stay constant. And again, thinking of the issue of variety, I think a society that doesn't generate enough variety will not be able to thrive. And that is true for disasters, as well as also ordinary type of processes.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm guilty. I agree with you 100%, but it was intentional, because I was trying to present to you, my audience, your reaction against the way that most people think. Most people don't think cybernetically. They don't think systemically. The vast majority of our population thinks in straight lines. They think disasters are coming and woe is me. They can find some bright light in it, but for us to start to think, recognize our own fast thinking going on, so that when we talk to others, we can try and see where they're coming from and meet where they're at, but help them find solutions. But whether that worked or not, I don't know. Maybe I failed.
There's a whole concept in cybernetics, and it's called epistemology.
Yes.
And Gregory Bateson once said, you cannot not have an epistemology, only a bad one.
Yep.
And the point is, we all have epistemology, and awareness of that, and that you're coming from your epistemological stance, which is not where I'm at all. And I don't want you to agree with me.
Good. because by our disagreement, we may be able to spot solutions that we would never see.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now we agree.
We're in trouble.
Yes. I just had two questions. One was about the hubris, where you said you were overcoming hubris, which seemed a little bit of a contradiction. And the idea of bouncing back 2 or 3 times better and being more earthquake resistant and rebuilding the commercial areas and making everything bigger and better than it was.
Not bigger.
Well, at least numerically better. I wasn't sure how that fitted with the hubris idea, because if the whole history of human progress has been one of hubris, where everyone always thought that things were getting better, and then the next flood and earthquake just caused however much better it was, it would just be 2 or 3 times as much damage. I wasn't really sure how that worked and how that fitted with resilience and non-linearity. And the second question was, again, I guess it's similar, about the causes and effects, and how you knew what was causes and what was effects, and how when you were given a health example of people like going home rather than being in the hospital, how that was dealing with the causes rather than dealing with the effects. Unless you thought that the causes were actually to do with people like having a wrong attitude to being in hospital or something.
Well, let me try and take the first question, and then I may have to come back to be refreshed what the second question was. So with regard to hubris, I don't think it's human pride and arrogance. It's not just about whether things are getting better or worse. And I guess the answer in the case of the city of Christchurch, there's a whole bunch of things I didn't tell you because I was trying to honor the fact that I was supposed to only have an hour, not 3 or 4. But in Christchurch, how the city was redesigned was as a consequence of the city council in a very different way from normal, inviting ideas from the community as to what they wanted their city's future to look like. Because typically what many organizations would do is they would just design a solution and they would give it to the people and ask for some feedback, and they might tweak a few minor changes and then they deliver that as the solution. But what the city did was they went out to the population, they got over 100,000 ideas. That's a lot of ideas. And those ideas got filtered down, and those ideas have found their way into the redesign of the city. And so I think the opposite of hubris is humility. It required humility on the city leaders' parts to say, we don't have all the answers. We think the people who live here, who will have to live with the consequences of whatever solutions we come up with, have those answers, or at least have some of them. And took the time to listen to them, to boil down to what appeared to be the best. It wasn't a perfect process because it wasn't a feedback loop to the population. But I can see, having participated in it, many of those good ideas have come through in the design of the city. So the city is more energy efficient, it is a smarter city, it is much more pedestrian, cycle friendly, or at least it will be when we finish the reconstruction. Right now, maybe it's not so much because there's so many construction workers and trucks and everything still rumbling around. And so I see, to the extent that we apply virtues like humility to our dealings, we'll get better solutions because it parks our fast thinking a bit and allows us to ask questions and receive answers from somebody else and to think about those solutions and how they fit as part of our design. With regard to the health example, they did a similar thing. They went out and talked to the community. I probably didn't follow it all the way through, but they brought in and conducted this design thinking process with the wider community as well, people who were patients. I'm an example because not when they started this process, but recently, because I had a biking accident, broke my hip about 5 months ago. So I seem like I'm hobbling slightly. That would be the reason, because I'm still recovering somewhat. But I was in the hospital, had an operation. I got 3 titanium screws in my hip, and I was out in 2 days. And I'm much healthier for it. I get better food at home. Yep. I can exercise when I want, not just when the physio person comes in to help me. It doesn't require self-discipline, so there are human individual issues there as well. I'm not exposed to the wide plethora of bacteria and viruses that are going around the hospital. So I'm much better off. Traditionally, 10 years ago, I would have spent a week at least in the hospital, maybe 2 weeks. And that would have cost, instead of, I'll pick a number, $2,000 a day, instead of costing $4,000, it would have cost them $20,000 or $30,000 to keep you in the hospital for all that time. And part of the cause is the caring, somewhat misguided caring of the medical profession for their patients. They think keeping them in the hospital longer sort of initially was a good thing, but it turns out it's not. And they only discovered that as a consequence of looking at what other researchers, social researchers, were doing beyond science, or beyond medical.
Most of your examples deal with systems, and they have problems. But I think in reality, social reality, the problems are inside the system. Racism, discrimination, revolution. Now, this concept, your concept is coming, so to speak, from the outside, trying to solve an existing problem that seems to be everyone agreeing on, but that is not the case in most of the social situations. What is surviving in the moment of a revolution? Who is surviving? There's actually variety playing against variety. The problems are in the process of definition and are not agreed upon. And that is actually where real social problems emerge, and how they're solved is another issue.
I think we've got a wide range of social problems, and I agree with you. I didn't address some of them, because our work is in the area of organizations. It's not in the area of society, but I think the ideas still are applicable, and I agree that what the nature of a good solution is contested. But the fact that we recognize that culture is critical is still speaking to that same issue. Culture is the way we deal with one another, the way we treat one another, the way we look at one another, our willingness to work with one another. And the reason for revolutions is an unwillingness to do any of those things. It's how you end up with a revolution.
But there are cultural differences.
There are, that's right.
Yeah.
But if we're willing to park our fast thinking and use a bit more of our slow thinking, we can find the commonalities, because the commonalities are always there, even when the differences are there. and we need to find the commonalities in order to bridge the gap. That would be my assertion. Yes, somebody else had a question or comment?
I do want to comment. Was it Judy who's?
Oh, it's Judy.
It's Judy.
I don't think your premise is correct about the commonality always being there. I think that's a hubris statement.
I would agree to disagree.
How does one address the problem of accountability for denial? I'm aware that in New Orleans, they did a scenario planning of a Hurricane Pamela, and this before Hurricane Katrina. And it was pointed out during that planning that the plans that they were making did not apply and would not help the third of the population who were poor. And that was simply disregarded. A friend and colleague of mine did her doctoral dissertation on disaster preparedness in Hawaii, using the viable system model and some other techniques. Her conclusions were that if a hurricane level 4 hit Hawaii, they would essentially be toast, but there were things that they could do to make it less likely that there would be tremendous loss of life and property. They basically told her straight out, we can't tell people about how bad it would be because we'd be out of office. On the other hand, if a hurricane at level 4 does hit Hawaii, they are going to be, total toast instead of half toast.
So what's the question? Is there a question I
The
can answer
question
there?
is, how do you address the accountability for denial?
Yeah, so I think just my thinking on that, part of what you're describing is what I've been saying, which is most people don't believe it's going to happen to them or don't want to hear about it, don't want to believe it'll happen to them. Happening to somebody else there that does happen. How do you deal with that as in society? And part of that's educating our children into new ways of thinking. So if we were trying to design a program for a resilient future, I wouldn't have given that talk. I would have been talking about what are some of the practical as well as philosophical things that we can do with our community as a whole. And that would be one of the things. What about as you say, the politicians in Hawaii? How will we hold them accountable when this bad thing happens and they were not listening? We'll throw them out. But that won't get rid of the fact that a lot of people died and a lot of stuff was destroyed, will it? And that's why, if I were approaching that problem, I'd be talking to the politicians about what pushes their buttons, talking to the community about what they want and need, and trying to join those up with what we think would provide a situation where a lot fewer people would die and a lot less damage would be done. But I don't have an answer to that because I haven't talked to any of those people yet. So I don't have an answer. But I think we have a process that we could use. And was used in Christchurch, so I've got examples where it did work. After the fact, we've got examples where it didn't work before the fact. Yeah, in New Zealand, we already have legislation that says if you're in an earthquake-prone building, which is anything that's not a newish building, any stone building, you have to upgrade it sometime in the next 30 years. Except the 30 years was 30 years, 50 years ago, so it just keeps getting rolled forward. Some people got thrown out of office as a consequence of not enforcing that. But the business people don't want to do it because there isn't any benefit today because they don't believe it's going to happen to them. So we've got this complex environment, and we have to deal with the real environment, though. We have to deal with people where they're really at, not where we wish they were, because that's not going to get us anywhere.
Well, there's an additional problem in that the standard accounting systems do not reward long-term preparedness. They focus on short-term, and for instance, an investment, if it doesn't pay off in 10 years, is considered to have zero return.
Absolutely. We've been working on a model funded by our central government for risk decision-making in disaster scenarios. And we recognize that problem, which is cost-benefit analysis, typical thing they apply, usually relatively short-term. They don't look at the social capital impacts. They don't look at the environmental impacts often. They don't look at the impacts on the human population. They think about the physicality side, the infrastructure. And our model includes all of those things and includes other tools besides just cost-benefit analysis because it's not a very useful tool. It's great for some things and not very useful at all. Give you lousy decisions for other things. talking to your community is one of the things that's in our model. Because over and over again, we see communities come up with great solutions. The city council is going to do this, and the planner is going to do that. They're going to put up this, whatever to protect against something, and then the population pushes back against it, and it never happens. It just dies. Rather than the designers, the planners, and politicians talking to people in the first place and coming up with a solution that will work for both of them, but not just for someone pushing a particular ideological viewpoint.
Two things. The first is, besides what happens after something like an earthquake with regards to resilience, there's also something really fascinating about what happens before, when a population knows that something is inevitable and it's going to come their way, but they don't move. Of course, in many cases that has to do with people not having the means to easily locate somewhere else. But there's also a certain defiance in that I haven't understood, and I've always been fascinated about this, the preparedness to live on a tectonic fold, which is really fascinating.
The thing is, sorry.
The second point that I wanted, it's not really a question, it's just something that I wanted to articulate. And responding to Candy, who I always have semi-disagreements with, this notion that we have an intellectual answer in circularity, I think also smells a little bit of hubris to me, because when you said that, I was imagining making that argument to someone who just spent a week digging up bodies out of a collapsed building.
Yep.
And if I have never done that, but I have talked to people who have done that, and I have an admiration for the drawing a very clear line between this is what we want to happen and this is what we don't want to happen again. And there's no talk about circularity and we're going to regrow and this is part of life and sometimes someone has to take a hit. And I think there's a disconnect between what sounds intellectually defensible in a setting like this and what shapes values in applied situations.
I think it's a little bit like my earlier comment about these 13 indicators, and sometimes some of them hardly apply at all. If you're building a model, some you'd set to 0 and others you'd set to 100%. I think the same thing applies to what you're talking about. In that setting, it isn't an either or, it's a both and, but under some circumstances you wouldn't talk about bouncing forward because you've got people who just died, they're grieving. That's not the time. And that's another problem for us human beings. We've got to deal with time, and we often struggle with, when's the right time to do which piece, which of these pieces, which of these ideas apply when. But that's part of our complex environment. We have to learn better how to do that. And that goes back to virtue. That requires wisdom.
There's a difference in looking at an individual and looking at a population.
Sure.
And what
You've got
serves which
scale differences. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you believe that the New Zealand culture has more of a propensity towards resilience? One of the things that really had amazed me looking at that country from an economic standpoint is the Big Bang and deregulation, the dropping of the tariffs and the farm subsidies. From somebody on the outside, you can't imagine that happening in Europe or in the United States.
He's talking about the New Zealand Great Depression of the 1980s. In 1983 or 84, a new government was elected. And previous to that, New Zealand had a very protected economy. The exchange rate was controlled, the interest rate was controlled. There was a large number of subsidies for all kinds of industries to protect them. And New Zealand was probably a pretty good place to live. But if we had continued that way, today New Zealand would be in a disastrous state. New Zealand's got a very good economy in spite of the global financial crisis and everything else because of the huge pain that we went through in the 1980s. I'll give you a specific example. We had farmers. We're one of the biggest sectors of our economy is agriculture. Farmers were encouraged to borrow money at 3%. That's the interest rate. This is when the real interest rates worldwide were 18 to 20%. So they were encouraged to borrow at 3% to invest in their farms, make them more efficient, more productive. And then along comes this government change. All of those protections are removed. So you're a farmer. Put that hat on. You're a farmer. You've got $2 million worth of borrowing to 3%. You can afford that fine, and you're doing great. And then 2 months later, the interest rates are 20%. That's what you're having to pay. What do you think you're doing? Yeah, some of you are thinking like some of those farmers, a lot of them blew their brains out. They walked off their farm. This is the farm their family, had been in their family for 4 generations, since 1840 or 1850. So it was huge pain. Was it well managed? I think it probably wasn't, because I think there are probably ways it could have been better managed. But New Zealand is getting the benefits of it today, and that's often the case with disasters. The people in Christchurch are much more resilient today than they were before the earthquakes, because they went through the earthquakes and had to learn some of these things. And New Zealand's probably quite a resilient place because we get a lot of disasters, because we're exposed to a lot of stuff. So stuff happens all the time in New Zealand. And it doesn't necessarily kill people because we've learned how to avoid some of that. But we still have a long way. We have a lot of things to learn still.
I think we should thank John and take a break. Okay, after you take your break, A is in this room, B is next door, C is in the compass room. And the compass room is by the pool. And we reconvene and your lunch is on your own. We reconvene in here.